Was goody YTBC? Was good fight fans, boxing heads around the world? B Marsh here with another boxing video. So on this day in history, in boxing history, May 10th, 1991, Lineal champion and IBF Middleweight Champion of the world, Michael II Nunn, faces James Lights Out Toney. Now at the time, the man Michael II Nunn in 1991, he was a Batman. He was on the verge of becoming a superstar. HBO was trying to market him as the next Sugar Ray Leonard. You know, he had an impressive record at the time, 36-0, 24 KOs, undefeated. You know what I'm saying? And he was a guy who had beat some pretty good names up until this fight that he faced James Toney, you know what I'm saying? So let's talk about him. He faced his arch rival and a nemesis from the amateurs, a guy who beat him in the amateurs, a guy by the name of Frank Tate. Frank Tate was the IBF Middleweight Champion of the world at the time. And the man, Michael II Nunn, he stopped him in the 9th round, you know what I'm saying? So the man, he avenged those losses from the amateurs to Frank Tate. I think Frank Tate was an Olympian too, if I'm not mistaken. You know what I'm saying? And then the man went on to face guys like Sumbu Kalambe. Sumbu Kalambe was a champion at the time. Actually, at the time, this fight was supposed to be a unification fight with Michael II Nunn and Sumbu Kalambe. You know what I'm saying? And the man Michael II Nunn was a guy who Sumbu Kalambe was the WBA champion, but he had got stripped. He got stripped by the WBA for not fighting. What's the man's name? Man, shit was long. What the fuck was his name? He got stripped for not fighting Harold Graham, the guy out of England, a great fighter out of England, a real smart guy, you know, real technician, but a guy who, you know, one of the best fighters probably to never win a world title. You know what I'm saying? Harold Graham, you know. And, you know, it's understandable why Sumbu Kalambe didn't fight Harold Graham again, because he had beat him already before, you know what I'm saying? He had beat him to a decision. You check it? So he went on to fight get a more lucrative payday in Michael Nunn. But the only thing, he didn't come with his WBA strap, because like I said, he got stripped for not fighting Harold Graham. So he fought with Michael Nunn, and this fight was also for the IBF. Michael Nunn's IBF middleweight title was on the line, and so was the vacant Lineal championship for the middleweight division. You know what I'm saying? So the southpaw Michael Nunn went on to starch the man Sumbu Kalambe in 1 round. You know what I'm saying? He knocked him out with a vicious left in 1 round. Sumbu Kalambe was a guy who had never been stopped in his career. That was the only time. Sumbu Kalambe was a champ, you know. He was a guy who beat guys like, you know, Mike McCollum, you know, Harold Grahams, you know. So, you know, he was a formidable champion, you know what I'm saying? Then the man, Michael II Nunn, went on to fight Iran Barkley. He beat him in a decision, you know what I'm saying, a majority decision. He went on to get another decision against the former welterweight champ, Marlon Starling, you know what I'm saying. Marlon Starling was coming up in weight, you know what I'm saying. And then Michael Nunn went on to fight the man named Donald Curry, and that Donald Curry was undisputed, at one point in time was the undisputed welterweight champion of the world, you know what I'm saying. He was a guy who, you know, was the next big thing in boxing, and even at a point in time was #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. You know, he had all 3 straps for the welterweight division, until he met a guy named the Ragamuffin Man, a man out of England, UK, a man with Jamaican roots, a man named Lloyd Hunnigan. And Lloyd Hunnigan knocked him out. I believe it was in the 8th round. You know what I'm saying? So those are guys, Michael Nunn had on his resume up until he fought a guy who was not ranked in the top 10 named James Lights Out Toney. You know what I'm saying? James Toney was a guy who was I think he was like 24-0. He had one draw at the time and 18 KOs. And he was stepping up to fight this guy named Michael Nunn, and Michael Nunn didn't even have to fight. He didn't have to fight or give this man James Toney a shot. You know what I'm saying? I guess he didn't know who Lights Out Toney was, but he sure enough did find out at the end of this fight. So this was a good fight, ladies and gents. You know what I'm saying? This is a fight to me, in my opinion, is one of the most defining fights in middleweight history, because this is when the legend of James Toney was born. James Toney had a remarkable career. He's still fighting. He's a throwback fighter. A guy with over 70 plus fights in his career, maybe even 80. You don't see guys with a record like his anymore. You know what I'm saying? So James Toney was a guy who was coming to fight this big southpaw who was taller, as you see. He was taller than James Toney. Michael Nunn was also had a longer reach. And Michael Nunn controlled the fight for the most part. You could say for the first half of the fight. You know what I'm saying? For the first half of the fight, Michael Nunn was using his jab, and he was throwing right hands in there. Left hands, and he was basically outboxing James Toney. James Toney occasionally was throwing some punches in there, but for the most part throughout the fight, his punch output was pretty low compared to the one of Michael Nunn. You know what I'm saying? That's mostly because James Toney was mostly in his defensive shell. He was slipping punches. He showed remarkable defense. You know what I'm saying? Great waist movement, as you can see there. You know what I mean? Great head movement. Occasionally he'd be in his Philly shell. You know what I'm saying? And he was a guy who was he was using his defense, but he wasn't much fire returning when like countering shots. You know what I'm saying? That's why James Toney, you could say probably by the fifth, sixth round, the man Michael Nunn had doubled him on the punches. You know what I'm saying? With punches landed and punches thrown, because James Toney, sure, he was slipping punches, but he wasn't returning fire or countering or making Michael Nunn pay. Making the mistake by missing and making him pay. You know what I mean? So, it was a boxing fight for the most part for Michael Nunn. He was throwing numerous jabs. Plenty. I think by the fifth round, if he landed 51, the man, James Toney only landed 9. You know what I'm saying? Of course, he's using his reach. He wanted to fight from the outside. And something happened in the from the 7th round on to the 8th round. James Toney, his corner was pressing him, telling him, man, now you got to fight this guy, man. You got to get on the inside and take the fight to him. And James Toney followed instructions. You know what I'm saying? You could see the Angelo Dundee. That was Michael Nunn's trainer, the legendary Angelo Dundee. And the man, James Toney's corner, they told him, man, you got to go out there and you got to make him pay, and, you got to let your hands go. And throughout the fight, like I said, Michael Nunn was hitting him with punches, but they weren't really hurting the man. They didn't have any steam on him. They were basically punches just to pick up points, you know what I mean? Now the man James Toney now started throwing that leather, man. He started swinging for the fences, and he was catching the man, Michael Nunn, with right hands. Boom, when you'd get in close. And now he was hurting the man. He was kind of even staggering him. And now Michael Nunn, I guess he didn't figure it out till it was too late. It's not a boxing fight no more. It's not a boxing match. James Toney's now coming for the win. He's trying to knock his head off. And James Toney started coming. To me, I had Michael Nunn winning every round up until the 8th round. He won every round except round 1. So James Toney won 1 out of 7 rounds. Then the man, 8th round, 9th round, 10th round, James Toney turned it on, man. He was occasionally getting hit. But like I said, those punches weren't hurting James Toney. They were just little pity-pat punches, to make, pick up points for Michael Nunn. Then in the 11th round, the man Michael Nunn got caught with a vicious left. A vicious left. He had his hands down after getting caught with a right. James Toney caught him with a vicious right, and it kind of hurt the man Michael Nunn, and Michael Nunn was basically just standing there thinking about what he just got hit with. And before he could even pick up his hands to throw a punch, he got caught with a devastating left. Boom! Joint dropped him on his ass, you know what I'm saying? Right on the seat of his pants. Boom! Right on his back. He got up before the 10th count, but you could tell he ain't have no legs. He probably didn't even know where he was at. And James Toney just, went on wailing on him, you know what I'm saying? Throwing right hands, he threw him, and the man was on the ropes, and he commenced to throw 2 more right hands and a couple lefts, and the ref just jumped in there and stopped the fight. And also, I think the, what's his name? Michael Nunn's corner threw in the towel, you know what I'm saying? Right when the ref came to stop the fight. So he got stopped on his feet, sure enough, but man, the man didn't know where he was. And right then and there, a star was born, man. James Toney became a legend in boxing lore, you know what I'm saying? He beat a guy, Michael Nunn, who was a guy who looked like he was unbeatable, you know what I'm saying? He was a guy who was 36-0. You know, he was third on the pound for pound list in 91. I believe the only guys ahead of him was Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. and Pernell Whitaker at the time. You know what I'm saying? So, the man was headed for stardom if he wasn't a star already, which I believe he was. And he was, on the come up. And James Toney just, stole his shine from him. He took his guiding light from him. And James Toney became that dude, you know what I'm saying? And this is James Toney's first world title, the IBF Middleweight strap at 160. And, he went on to have a good career, a few losses here and there, some good wins, beating guys like, eventually he had beat wins with guys like Holyfield, you know what I'm saying? He beat some good guys along the way, even though he did have some losses. And Michael Nunn, he went on to become a 2-time world champion, went on to get an IBF strap at 168. But, he wasn't quite the same guy after that loss from James Toney. So, I had James Toney down maybe 2 points on my scorecard before he knocked him out. But the judges, they had the man Michael Nunn up on the scorecards pretty high, you know what I'm saying? They had scores like 98, 91, 97, 92, you know what I'm saying? And this was a big fight for Michael Nunn because he was coming home to fight in front of his home crowd in Davenport, Iowa, you know what I'm saying? But unfortunately, man, he didn't bring home the gold. He didn't retain his title. And James Toney went on to become a champion. Alright, y'all, that's my video on this day in boxing history. Let me know what you think about the fight, if you liked it. Did you like it or not? Who were you rooting for? Were you a fan of any of these two, James Toney or Michael Nunn? And if you like the video and my content, please hit that thumbs up. And please subscribe. Alright, y'all, that's on this day in boxing history, May 10th, 1991. Michael Nunn gets beat by James Toney, and James Toney wasn't even ranked in the top 10. Alright, y'all. Peace. Thanks for listening.